Thanks, everyone. So I think like most people speaking today, we turned to ChatGPT first to help us structure this talk. But we're also data engineers, so we needed this in a nice table. And so today, over the next 20 minutes or so, we'll talk through how we go from prompting LLMs to getting structured data for data engineering. I think it's safe to say landscape is changing very rapidly. So November 30th, ChatGPT was released to the world, and here we are today, and it's not even a year, right? And I think, would you agree this has sort of changed a lot about how we see the world and work in this world, right? Slide went missing. So I think back then, we could have argued that as a data engineer, there wasn't really much to do in the LLM space. Maybe transformers was really in the domain of the data scientist. But sort of fast forwarding to today, there's really a lot we need to be evolving in terms of skills to make the most out of LLMs, from prompt engineering, security, learning new frameworks like Hugging Face, etc. And similar to Mickey's talk, we're moving from this world of just thinking about data ops to also LLM ops as well. And the real question, I think, for Zach and myself is like, what does the future look like, and how are we meant to evolve for the future as well? These slides moved, sorry. So speaking of us, I think it's a good time to say hello. So I'll pass it to Zach first, who has the better set of hair.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'm Zach. I've been working across data platforms and at Endeavour across brands in the personalization space since about 2019. And
hi, I'm Vinny. I'm a senior solution architect at Databricks. So I've been in the data space for about 20 years this year, which is crazy. But I could safely say the last 12 months has probably been the most turbulent in terms of learning new skills.
Absolutely. So there are a bunch of various use cases for LLMs that are being unlocked, particularly for data engineers. I'm sure you've already had or tried some form of Copilot, whether it be GitHub's Copilot or Databricks' new internal tooling, or just the ChatGPT side window where you're just typing in your questions. But there's also lots of use cases for building a richer data landscape, being able to handle things like complex summarization problems, generalized classification systems, PII detection systems, without building highly bespoke systems that are just specialized in that area. So when you're beginning that LLM journey, it can be really important to ask, what type of company do you want to be? Because that's really going to change where your focus is going to be. If your focus is going to be on a core function, so Endeavour Group, we're primarily a retail company, then we really just want to take the industry's best technologies rather than building everything from scratch. But if you're focused on your technical expertise, then if you're a software as a sales, you might be having a larger R&D budget, focused on pushing a lot more of those boundaries. But in either case, you're really focused on delivering that business value. And in either track, you can really get that. And you can get that either with taking an as-is model, like using the OpenAI gateways that they've got, or you could have your own in-house models and just fine-tune from one of the many open source models that currently exist. And so just digging a bit deeper in terms of like picking up those LLMs and trying to figure out what your first use case is going to be. So it can be quite tricky. There's lots of different things that you can tackle. And for data engineers, you might find that there is a lot of internal tooling that you can pick up and enhance rather than building something entirely new from scratch. So if you're looking at things like documentation processes, good documentation can be really hard to come by, especially for internal products. And things like PR summaries and release summaries that are easy to understand can really help bridge that understanding between devs and the wider business. Error reporting is another area that we can really delve into in enhancing. And also preparing mock data quickly with enough diversity. Often it can be really laborious and tedious, but LLMs can really speed up that process, as Vinny will demonstrate in a bit. So for error reporting, One of the core systems that we have at Endeavour is called the personalization engine. And whenever it has an issue, we have it hooked it up so it automatically creates a Jira ticket, fills in the details about what failed, gives us a stack trace, assigns it to a sprint, marks it as a bug, connects to Slack and gives out messages to the right channels and the right people, and tells them, they've got to basically fix it. That's good, but what's missing, right? A stack trace can be really, really helpful, but often the developer is going to go through that stack trace and try to get the actual meaning out of it. And we can really speed up those processes, right? So we can give things like sifting through that stack trace and give a summary. Okay, this is what the error is. This is the type of error that it is, and here's a suggestion for what it could be to fix it. And because this is an internal tooling, you don't have to worry about the customers seeing the LLM hallucinate, and now you've got to kind of go into full panic mode. It's usually going to be a developer who's going to say, okay, this is probably what it is. I agree. I'm going to go down that pathway of fixing it. And we also have a pretty decent release note system. So we have an internal tool for our release notes, which basically just takes, it's in part of our CI/CD pipeline. Whenever we do a release, it gets all the Git history, populates a template that we store in Confluence, and it pushes that page as a release note, and it grabs things like the Jira tickets and things like that are relevant. But if we want to make that more easier for our product managers and delivery leads to really be able to understand what is coming in this release, what are all the changes, then we can actually further improve that with an LLM, giving us a really nice, quick summary of what is actually coming in. And even if it's a little bit wrong, it's not too bad because it's, again, an internal tool, so they can look down at the page, look at the Jira tickets, look at the actual tasks, and they can get the higher level of detail. But for that quick glimpse, it's very powerful. So I'll pass to Vinny.
All right, thank you. So we've looked at using LLMs to make our lives, our processes easier. Also, as data engineers, key responsibility is enriching the data that we're handling as well. So we'll take a look at how we can use LLMs for that as well. I think it's safe to say often we're sitting on a lot of unstructured data like customer reviews, product descriptions, that we actually don't know what to do with it because it seems troublesome, problematic to have ML models to do something meaningful there. But the great thing with LLMs is, it's language models. We can start to do things like summarization, entity detection, and so on. So how do we, bring this into our data pipelines? So the examples I'm going to show you are living within Databricks, but these sorts of capabilities are starting to come into other platforms as well. So hopefully you can start to utilize these tactics wherever you work. So if we have raw data without meaning, unstructured data, how do we get to enrich data with meaning? And Renee said Python is anything in Python is beautiful. To me, anything in SQL is beautiful. So let's look at how we use SQL to get there. So in Databricks, we have a function called AI generate text. And that SQL function, what it does is it talks to OpenAI or Azure OpenAI in the backend using your API keys. That's one way to get LLMs to do something with your data. So that's option one, using sort of a commercial LLM. And then there's option two, which is having an LLM that sits in your environment. Something you control, where you can control who sees the data and what's acted upon. And so there's a function called AI query. And with that, what you need to do ahead of time is get a model, whatever LLM of choice, do what you need to do with it, fine-tuning, etc., and then have it served. And so AI query will speak to that model. Now, there are two options, but it's not an either-or decision, right? I think we need to be thinking about at what moments do we want to use commercially available LLMs, at what moments do we want to use our own LLMs. So obviously there are pros and cons to each. I think having like an OpenAI, Palm 2, Cohere, etc. These are ready to use state-of-the-art models. You don't have to do much. You don't have to manage them, but they are closed box, and there are some pieces of data, especially if they're sensitive, that you wouldn't want to move outside of your environment. So at least then with the second option, you have a bit more control. It's your own models. You can govern access and what data is used. But it does require management, right? And that's LLM ops there. So let's look at a sort of a sample scenario where I can show you how both functions work together. So we'll look at, a problem I hear a lot. We've got all this like unstructured data. We think there may be PII in there inadvertently. Like if you've dealt with customer reviews or help desk reviews, how many times has somebody put their email address in? I've seen credit card numbers, etc. And so a lot of times organizations just lock that data away because they think it's too risky to pass it downstream to do any analysis on. And so it's a massive opportunity cost on that data. So we'll look at how we use LLMs to actually identify the PII, extract it, mask it, all those types of things. So what we'll do in this scenario, we'll use OpenAI to generate some sample raw data for us containing PII. So OpenAI is great for mock data. Then we'll use Mosaic ML 7B instruct model in our environment to actually do the detection and masking of the PII, and then pass that PII profile data downstream to our business users. So if we look at that first step with Azure OpenAI, so as I said, in Databricks, there's a function called AI generate text. What you'll see there is up the top, we're just passing it a prompt, any prompt that you put into ChatGPT. The rest of the lines are just pointing it to the model that we've deployed on Azure OpenAI. And when I run that query, I get a response, right? It will come in a table, or this is one row, one column, plain text response. This SQL function's pretty wordy, so what I like to do is actually wrap it up in another SQL function. We just call it prompt handler. So this is an easier function to actually pass on to your analysts to use in their everyday work. So how would we generate raw data with PII? So we go to ChatGPT, we ask it to create data for us. But the output isn't that very useful for me. It's text in a table, HTML there, so I can't really do much with it. But the nice thing about all these LLMs is we can actually get them to speak back to us in a language that we can understand and do something with. So we can instruct the LLM to kind of speak back to us in JSON. So here I've modified the prompt and say, give me all this data in a JSON format exactly like this. So now we've got data that looks familiar to kind of our everyday work. So how do we get this into a table? Well, if you have a function like from JSON, for example, so we can run our SQL query, get a text response. So with from JSON, we could say, I know this plain text response has a schema or a structure like this, and so it can convert that plain text into a structured data format. So which is great, which then means, okay, so here's a function that's going to generate my sample data for me. So this is kind of how I'd call it, like just generate sample PII reviews. I wanted 15 of them. Because I know it's going to be an array of structs, I can explode out the array, I can pull out the keys of the structs as columns. And so we get data that's structured, right? It's a table, rows and columns that we can work with. And if we even click into one of these reviews, we can see, ChatGPT's put some sample PII in there. So now we've got some sample data we can play with. How do we actually go about like masking, etc.? So we have another function called AI query, and what we're really doing is pointing it to a model that we've got served in our environment, and we're passing it a prompt here, and you can add in additional parameters as well. So the first thing we really need to do is get that model in a good shape. So why, for this example, where we're using MPT 7B instruct, I think there's a few ways to, every day a new model's coming out. So usually I'd go to Hugging Face first to kind of look at what's out there, search for models based on your use cases, look at their benchmarks, etc. But the other thing we need to also, if we're going to use this for our day-to-day work, is also sort of evaluating these models for their license as well. So this is just a table that's on the Databricks website, but first thing we're doing is evaluating models, open source models. So you're free to use it and you can inspect it, but also where we can have it for commercial use, right? And then we need to kind of balance high quality versus speed versus costs, like where's a good middle point. And so hence for this, we decided we'll use MPT7B instruct. We could be using Llama 2, etc. Come talk to us again in a month. This list is probably very different. So now we've chosen a model. Getting it into the system is pretty easy with Hugging Face's SDKs. We can just do a snapshot download. Then the next thing we want to do is wrap this into what we call an MLflow PyFunc model. So MLflow, open source, I like to think of it as like a model or ML management framework. Lives within Databricks, but you can use it outside of Databricks as well. What a PyFunc model is we're wrapping up the model and all our pre-processing, post-processing logic in something that looks like a Python function. And because it's like a Python function, that means we can use it in UDFs with data frames, or we can also use it in SQL with AI query. So just diving into the code a bit there, I'm not going to go into detail, but we can do things like, start to sanitize our prompts in there, and even start to transform the outputs that come. And we're talking about vector databases as well. You could be doing, vector lookups and passing that on to the model as well, and not the end user doesn't have to worry about all that implementation. Then we go ahead and we've got that PyFunc model. We then have to go serve it somewhere. And once it's served, we got to think about the prompt that we want to send, right? So this is one of the prompts we played with. We still need to work on it a little, but essentially it's saying, look, detect PII, mask it, pull out any PII you see, and give us a JSON object that looks like that. So now we know the prompt. We can put a nice function together. And then when we have our table, like here we call it customer reviews with PII, it's really about calling that detect PII function we just defined on our review column, which has our free text data, right? So this is why I think like SQL is a beautiful language. This makes sense to me. Python is my next favorite beautiful language. And so, this allows your analysts, your engineers to really start to apply LLMs to data without really needing to know the implementation details. So, and this is what we end up with, right? So we've gone from unstructured data with PII in it. We've been able to, start to profile that data, like pulling out what PII detected and the values, and even taking a stab at masking that PII as well. Does this look perfect? No, but it's a great start, like a first stab at it, to be able to get to this in like an hour of experimentation as opposed to days and days of model development. So we've seen that end-to-end using commercial LLMs, your own LLMs to generate data, mask it, etc. But that's just the beginning, right? Now that you've got nicely profiled data, you can expose the right data to your business users. What do we do downstream that can also utilize LLMs? So like entity resolution, sentiment analysis, maybe even generating responses for customers. And so you can start to chain a whole bunch of these SQL functions together to get meaning out of your data. I'll pass it back to Zach.
So yeah, just tying it back, LLMs are really a data engineer's game. It's one of our core responsibilities to enable enhancing those processing, enriching that data. And we're really at a pivotal moment in time. There is a lot to learn, but learning these skills will unlock basically a treasure trove of possibilities for both your businesses, but also for your personal career potentials and development. And there are lots of choices, and there are a growing number of choices every day. And whether it be choosing between the commercial LLMs that are easy to start and quick to launch, or maybe spending that a little bit of extra time to getting your own LLM running in your own environment to have that more granular control and avert those security and privacy concerns, either way, you'll be able to unlock a lot of benefits. So that's us for today, but come see us speak about data streaming in Melbourne and Sydney at the upcoming Data and AI World Tour. At ADG, we're currently looking at building out more real-time ML personalization services using really low latency things, using Databricks live tables. So if you're interested, it should be a fun talk, and we'd love to see some of you guys there too. Thank you.
Thank you very much.